parameters in the software, and then you have to show, you have to figure out what's the probability of any of these things happening. On top of all that, then there's a matrix of calculating what the effect on the patient's going to be. And your mitigation factors have to be pretty strong, so that if a blood sugar was entered as a negative 200, that's a not allowed number. Software has to recognize the nurse either doesn't allow her to enter negative 200, or if she puts in a negative 200, it tells her that's not allowed. Stuff like that.
So, we want to start getting into our project now?
Yeah. Can I ask one question? These curves that you have, were they constructed from empiric data that you had from these initial trials, and then you wrote equations to describe these? Or did you just theoretically write a bunch of equations?
Well, I knew,
and tested them?
no, I knew out here, there was literature out here saying that if your sugar was 1,000, it should not come down more than 100 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew what it had to be out here.
Okay.
Also knew what the goals were. So if this is the lower, if this is the 90 and this is the 120, you have to be there. You have to. It has to look like that in that range. Because if you're here, then anywhere in here is okay. And in medicine, it's in industry, usually it's one line. You're trying to hit one target. You set your thermometer to one number. You don't set your thermometer to a range. But in medicine, we're just not that precise. So a range is usually what we try to aim for, partly because the glucometers, the meters that read these things, have a plus or minus 2-3% on the readings. And that's if you're lucky. And the same is true with all devices. They have a plus or minus. The FDA doesn't require anything more than about 2 or 3, 4% on most readings. So you pick a pill, and it's supposed to have 10 milligrams of something in it. That means it'll have somewhere between 9.93 and 10.07. That's what's in that pill. It's a range. And so in medicine, we were aiming at ranges rather than hard numbers. Because the problem with going toward a hard number is that if you're not right on the number, you make a change. You're always making changes up and down. And that's not very stabilizing. That's very unstable. So you don't want to, with this software, if we did blood sugars, every minute,
You
so
get the wave effect.
we get the critical harmonics, and you get it going like this, and then what would happen is you would fall under, say, 40 for some period of time, and as soon as you got under 40 for not very many minutes, you're dead. I mean, it depends on a lot of things. It's more than being under 40. Understanding all this is important because it's not the number, it's the number plus the amount of sugar coming in. Because what kills the cell, your brain cell, is not having a low blood sugar in your blood, it's having a low blood sugar in your brain cell. And so if you had a lot of sugar outside the brain cell, I mean coming into the system, and it's just like going into the cells at a fast rate so that the level in the blood system is low, the cell may have an okay level. So it's the physiology that's important.
That'd be different for their oxygen though.
Yeah, it'd be very different. Everything's different.
Yeah.
Oxygen.
I mean, they don't need to necessarily focus on
No.
the brain aspects.
That's correct. You're right. But what you're trying to do is keep an oxygen saturation at a certain point. Right?
Yeah, basically 90% to 100%.
Yeah.
Get a little tighter.
I target, 88 to 93 or so.
Yeah.
Pick a specific range.
Yeah, and you also, and this is a question for your dad. If somebody gets 100%, do they quit breathing? I mean, some people breathe are driven by acidosis, they breathe to get rid of CO2. Other people breathe to get oxygen. And so there are breathing centers, as I understand it, you tell me if I'm wrong, that are oxygen driven. So that if you get the oxygen too high, you quit breathing, then the acidosis is going to build up. So if you give somebody way too much oxygen, they can become acidotic. I mean, if they have that kind of symptom. If they
Yeah, that's rare, but,
And for how
possible.
long? What kind of time exposure do you have to have for that?
Depends on
Two.
the individual.
Yeah, there's another range.
Yeah. And then most people, a lot of people breathe based on getting rid of CO2.
Right.
And therefore, you're just providing oxygen to meet whatever their breathing rate is so that you get a saturation. And so what you want to do is you want to measure oxygen. If you're getting lots of data faster than you plan to respond. Now, obviously, if it goes from 93 to 0, you're going to respond quickly. But if it's 93, then 92, then 92, then 91, and 90, you're probably going to draw some lines and look at trends. And so you're gonna average data and see how much statistical variation you have. You're gonna have to decide how far back to look at any given time. You're gonna do statistical numbers to see how much variation you have. You're gonna have limits on that to decide when you have error codes. And you're gonna have some overriding error codes, like if somebody were to take a big change, then you want to have something go on. Think through it. Think through the number of times. How many times in a row do you want to put up with, let's say, less than 80 or so, some factors, before you send out an alarm? The alarm is either to call the nurse, or in today's sophisticated world, I think the best way to, since the nurse may not be in the room, the best way is to build into your software that you call the responsible nurse or the nursing station. And then you have a recorded message, patient so-and-so has a low oxygen, and then that's an immediate notice to the caregiver to go see what's disconnected. But those are safety things. You got to think of all your safety things after you build your primary feedback controller. Then you have to decide how much variation you want to have in your feedback control. You want to allow the software to turn the oxygen off. And if the doctor says this patient needs oxygen, but what he really needs is to have a saturation of 90% plus, you have to decide what parameters you put on first. What are the upper limit, what are lower limits, what are minimum? How much variation do you allow the doctors to set? Because let me tell you, most of the doctors don't think this way at all. So you may say, I have a target of 90%. Well, you may have to put the range. And that range may be plus or minus 5, whatever he chooses. So if he chooses 97, then it's 100 down to 92, stuff like that. But there's common sense things that you guys decide after reviewing it with the real doctor. This go ahead. What was the other question?
I'm not really sure, but I was thinking about getting more specific on like the hardware we'd need for like I guess that we'd have the software on. Would it be a computer, or would we have some other thing sort of related to yours? What did you use? And
Well, I had the advantage that I can input the data separately, manually. I don't know whether they have RS-222 output from those devices, O2 devices. You need to get a hold of one of these oxygen devices, or have your dad steal one from the hospital.
An oximeter.
Oximeter, that's what they're called, okay. Well, go to the internet, and my guess is there's output from them, and then my guess it's RS-232, whatever the code is. It's probably compatible. And if you could get that data out, what it's going to do is it's going to give you a continuous reading